central banks around the world are concerned about the weaponization of the U.S. dollar and the SWIFT system. They saw what happened to Russia and what is happening to Russia now, and they don't want that to happen to them. And so we have created another reason for the world to de-dollarize. I mean, they had plenty of reasons to do it anyway, but we were foolish enough to give them even more because America benefits dramatically from the dollar's reserve status. And when we lose that status, and we will, it's a matter of time, it's going to be a huge wake-up call because it's going to mean a dramatic decline in the standard of living of just about every American. And so, you know, it's a mistake to accelerate that process. I mean, if you're a politician, if you really understood it, but that's what we've done. And so, yeah, I'm sure that these foreign central banks are buying more gold for that reason. And also, you know, they think the dollar is going to lose value and they want to have a more stable store of value as a reserve asset for their own currencies. And so I think that's going to continue, especially when the world kind of wakes up to the reality that 2% inflation is a thing of the past. Inflation rate is going to be much higher than that, at least, you know, even the way the government measures it. And that's going to result in a revaluation or repricing of the dollar and a repricing of gold. I mean, the dollar is worth a lot less in a higher inflation environment, especially if interest rates will be perpetually negative, and gold is worth a lot more. And, you know, when the markets come to terms with that, you're going to see the adjustment. They never should have had a 2% target. There's no reason for inflation to be 2%. It's not like if it's 1% that's a problem and it needs to be higher. The only problem with 1% is that it's not zero. Zero inflation is better than 1%. So if inflation is 1%, it's not that it needs to be 2%. And in fact, if you have falling prices, if prices are going down by 1%, there's no need to force them higher. I mean, we all benefit from falling prices. I mean, everybody wants to buy stuff for less money. There's nothing wrong with prices going down. That's how standards of living go up, right? The things that you want to buy are less expensive. I mean, everybody wants to buy stuff for less money. Sometimes if you can't afford something, you have to wait until the price comes down and then you can afford to buy it. I mean, so falling prices creates demand and it lifts living standards, and it's what we need. But, you know, the Fed concocted this BS that we needed 2% inflation. We didn't. We needed it like a hole in the head. But the problem is now they've created so much inflation under the guise of targeting 2% that they have no way of even bringing it back down to 2%. But I have no idea what the annual rate is going to be. But whatever it is, it will not be reported accurately because they're going to continuously monkey around with the CPI. And so it's never going to honestly reflect how much prices are going up. In fact, all the years that the Fed claimed we had less than 2% inflation, my guess, it was at least double, if not triple 2%. We're going to increase the debt ceiling. Now, we would all be better off if we never increased the debt ceiling, had they never raised it the very first time. And we've had it for like 100 years, but we'd be better off if the initial debt ceiling was still in place and we didn't have all this debt. The reason we have so much debt is because they keep raising the ceiling. And it's nonsense to say we have to raise the ceiling to pay our bills. If we wanted to pay our bills, we wouldn't have to raise the ceiling. We would just pay our bills. The reason we want to raise the debt ceiling is so we can continue to not pay our bills, so we can go into debt instead of paying our bills. But the problem is paying the bills actually costs money. Nobody wants to pay the bills. The politicians want to keep on kicking the can down the road, so they want to raise the debt ceiling again so that we can continue to not pay our bills and have the debt, national debt, go up to 35 trillion, 40 trillion, 50 trillion, infinity and beyond. But the problem is going to come when we reach a ceiling that we can't raise. And that is the lending ceiling. That is the willingness of the rest of the world to loan us money, because when we hit that ceiling, then we're done. But the crazy part about it is we tell our creditors, if we can't borrow more money, we will default. Well, we're basically telling the creditors that this is a Ponzi scheme because we're only going to pay back our current bondholders if we find somebody dumb enough to buy new bonds. And then we could take that money and use it to pay off the guys who own our bonds now. I mean, but why would you deliberately loan money to a government, if they're telling you right off the bat, if we can't borrow more money, we're just going to default and you're never going to get your money back. The politicians should be saying, if we don't raise the debt ceiling, we are going to cut Social Security, we're going to cut Medicare, and we're going to prioritize interest on the national debt. Or we're going to have an emergency tax hike. We're going to raise everybody's taxes so we can pay the debt. No, they don't say that. They say if we can't borrow more money, we're defaulting. I mean, so how much longer can this go on? Because default is inevitable. It's only a question of when. Now, of course, the other thing that they can do if they're not going to default, well, they just print. Well, then there's hyperinflation, and that's the same thing. It's actually worse than defaulting. Inflation is a form of default. If the central bank prints a bunch of money and you have 10% inflation and we have a $30 trillion national debt, we've just repudiated $3 trillion of the 30. I mean, it is a slow default. That's what it is. It's just a different way of defaulting. You do it through inflation instead of just reducing what you pay. But it's the impact is the same for the bondholders. Either you get all your money back, but you can't buy as much, or you get less money back, but you can actually buy the same let's say there's 10% inflation. If I got 90 cents on the dollar, well, that's the same as getting 100 cents on the dollar with 10% inflation, or I can get 90 cents on the dollar with no inflation. But, prices are going to go up a lot more than 10%. I mean, they could double, they could triple, they could quadruple. And that is a huge haircut. The bondholders end up losing 70, 80% or more of the value of what they loaned. And, that's like the government paying off 10 cents on the dollar, 20 cents on the dollar. Certainly by next year, the interest tab, assuming just a Fed 5% rate, right? Fed funds rate, which we're going to be at, in March, or, the Fed's going to hike rates another couple, 50 basis points or so. That's what it says. We should be at $1 trillion in interest by the end of the year, if not next year. But we're not going to stop there. I mean, then we'll be $2 trillion, and what happens when the national debt is $50 trillion and interest rates are 10%. Well, that's $5 trillion a year in interest on the national debt. I mean, the numbers are enormous because the debt is going to keep going up and interest rates are going to have to keep going up because the more debt we have, the more inflation we're going to create. And the more inflation we create, the higher interest rates have to be. So this is an unsustainable. Even Powell admitted that what we're doing is unsustainable. It is unsustainable. And when is it going to end? Only when there's a crisis. And a crisis is coming because the politicians will not act in advance of a crisis to avert one. They will wait until there is a crisis, and then they will try to react to the crisis after it happens. And so there will be a debt crisis. The only question is when. And I think it will be a currency crisis as well as a debt crisis, because the response to a debt crisis is to print more money, and that creates the currency crisis.